Welcome to the Quiet Records. Every case has a moment where the official story runs out, where the file goes quiet and all that's left is what can't be explained. That's where we start. This is a true unsolved mystery, told the way it actually happened. The date was December 1st, 1948. The place, Somerton Beach, a quiet stretch of coastline just outside Adelaide, Australia, the kind of place locals walk their dogs in the early morning and nothing much ever happened. That morning, a passerby noticed a man reclining against the seawall, legs crossed at the ankles, one arm resting on the sand. He looked by every account like a man enjoying the sun. Nobody thought twice about it. People napped on that beach all the time. It wasn't until later that evening, when the man hadn't moved even slightly, that someone finally walked over to check on him. He was dead, and no one had any idea who he was. He carried no identification. His pockets held a comb, a box of matches, some chewing gum, an unused bus ticket, and a train ticket, the kind of ordinary items you'd find in anyone's coat. But every single label had been carefully removed from his clothing. Not torn off in a hurry, removed deliberately as though someone had wanted to erase any trace of where he'd come from. That single detail was enough to tell investigators this wasn't an ordinary death. Someone, possibly the man himself, had gone out of his way to make sure that if he was found, he couldn't be traced. The autopsy raised more questions than it answered. The man appeared to be in excellent physical condition, somewhere in his 40s, well-built, with unusually developed calf muscles that one examiner would later associate with a specific kind of manual work or athletic training. His organs showed signs consistent with poisoning, but no traces of any known poison were ever found in his system. Whatever had killed him, it didn't match anything in the standard toxicology reference books of the time. Police released his photograph. No one came forward. They circulated his description across the country. Still nothing. Weeks passed, and then a detail emerged that would come to define the entire case. A small, neatly torn scrap of paper was discovered tucked into a hidden fob pocket sewn inside the man's trousers, a pocket so obscure that investigators had missed it during the initial examination. Printed on the scrap were two words in an elegant, unfamiliar script: Tamam Shud. Detectives eventually traced the phrase to the final page of a rare book of Persian poetry, a collection of verses about mortality, fate, and letting go. The words themselves translate roughly to "it is ended" or "finished," traditionally printed at the close of the book, marking the final page. But what happened next would puzzle investigators for decades. Police put out a public appeal, asking whether anyone owned a copy of that exact book missing its final page. A man came forward. He'd found a copy, thrown unlocked into the back seat of his unlocked car, parked near the beach around the time of the death. The final page had been torn out, it matched, and tucked inside the back cover of that book, investigators found something else: a phone number written in pencil along with a short block of capital letters that appeared to be some kind of code. The phone number led police to a woman who lived not far from the beach, a nurse. When questioned, she denied knowing the dead man, though several investigators who were present later described her reaction as visibly uneasy. She was never formally implicated in anything. She kept her account of events for the rest of her life and took most of what she knew to her grave. The code, meanwhile, has never been definitively solved. Cryptographers, hobbyists, and amateur codebreakers have spent 75 years proposing solutions, some suggesting it's a genuine cipher, others arguing it's simply a shorthand list, or even the scribbled first letters of a poem the man was trying to remember. None of the proposed solutions have ever been proven, and several respected cryptographers have concluded it may not be solvable at all, that it might not even be a cipher in any formal sense. Theories about the man's identity multiplied over the decades. Because it was 1948 and Cold War tensions were rising fast, one persistent theory held that he was a spy. The poisoning that left no trace, the missing labels, the coded note, all pointing toward espionage. Adelaide sat near sensitive weapons testing sites at the time, and Australia was quietly cooperating with British and American intelligence services. It was, some investigators argued, exactly the kind of location where a foreign agent might turn up dead under mysterious circumstances. Others were convinced it was simpler and sadder, a case of heartbreak. The poetry book, the theory goes, points to a man who saw himself in those verses about endings, and for decades neither theory could be confirmed. The body was buried in an unmarked grave in West Terrace Cemetery under a headstone that simply read, "Here lies the unknown man." And that's where the case seemed destined to stay, not solved, not forgotten, just quietly unresolved for generation after generation. Investigators retired. New investigators took over the file and retired too. The nurse who once answered a knock at her door died without ever fully explaining what she knew. Decade after decade, amateur code breakers tried and failed to crack the letters in the back of that poetry book. By the 2000s, the Somerton Man wasn't just a cold case. He'd become something closer to a legend, a name true crime communities argued about for fun, a puzzle that felt permanently unsolvable. And then in 2022, everything changed at once. Using DNA extracted from strands of hair preserved for 70 years inside the original plaster cast of the man's face, the same cast police had made just days after his death, researchers applied the same genetic genealogy techniques that had recently cracked some of the coldest, most notorious unsolved cases in the world. They built out a family tree from distant relatives, then they narrowed it, and then after 74 years, they finally had a name. Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer born in Melbourne in 1905. For one brief moment, it felt like the case was finally over. It wasn't. Because a name doesn't explain why every single label was removed from his clothes. A name doesn't explain the untraceable poison or the hidden pocket, or the two words sewn into his coat that mean "it is finished." A name doesn't explain why a woman living minutes from where he died reacted the way she did when police first came asking. Records suggest Webb's life had been difficult, a broken marriage, financial trouble, the kind of quiet desperation that might explain a man wanting to vanish. But wanting to disappear and knowing how to disappear this completely, this deliberately, are two very different things. Giving the Somerton Man a name didn't close the file. It just proved the case was solvable and left the hardest part of it wide open. We now know who he was. We may never know why he ended up on that beach or what those pencil-written letters were really trying to say. Maybe that's fitting. The book that started it all was about endings, about the peace of simply being finished. Perhaps Charles Webb chose those words for himself, or perhaps someone else chose them for him and left him there to be found. Either way, the coat with no labels, the poison no lab could identify, and the code no one has ever broken are still sitting exactly where he left them, unresolved. We'll be back every week with the cases the world has never fully closed. Subscribe to The Quiet Record so you don't miss the next one, and check the pinned comment below because we want to know what you think. Who do you believe was behind it?